Clint Eastwood had done something no one in Hollywood expected of a man who built his name on squints and six-shooters. He had walked off with Best Picture and Best Director for Unforgiven, the bleakest western of his career. He could have done anything next. What he chose was a thriller about an aging Secret Service agent haunted by the one day he could not undo. That choice pulled together a screenwriter who had nearly quit the business, a German director coming off a flop, a villain who would terrify a generation, and the first film the United States Secret Service ever agreed to help make. Here are 24 secrets behind In the Line of Fire. The strangest involves a sitting president who praised the movie on live television and a studio that chose to bury his endorsement rather than use it. Number 1. The spec script that saved a life. For most of the late 1980s, Jeff Maguire was a writer in the most precarious sense of the word. He had spent close to a decade chasing a Hollywood career that refused to arrive, and by the start of the new decade, the bills had won. He was behind on rent, weeks away from losing his phone line, and already boxing up his apartment to leave Los Angeles for good. He had one strong idea left in him, a story about a guilt-ridden Secret Service agent hunting a would-be presidential assassin. The pages were finished and polished. Nobody was buying. Then the floor dropped out in the opposite direction. Castle Rock read the screenplay and bought it in under 2 days, paying $1.4 million for it, one of the largest spec sales anyone in town could remember. In the space of a single weekend, Maguire went from working out how many more weeks he could afford to stay before the move to selling one piece of writing for more money than most people earn in a decade. The script that no studio had wanted suddenly had every studio's attention. The detail Maguire kept retelling afterward was a small one. To pay for a proper celebration dinner, he and his wife returned a blouse he had just bought her for her birthday and put the refund toward the meal, because the money from the sale had not actually reached his account yet. Less than a year later, the same writer who had been pricing one-way tickets out of town stood nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. The film had come within a packed suitcase of never existing at all. Number 2. The real agent who haunted Clint. I'll live with that to my grave. Those were the words of Clint Hill, the Secret Service agent who had thrown himself onto the back of John F. Kennedy's moving limousine in Dallas in a desperate attempt to shield the president and First Lady. He said them on 60 Minutes more than a decade after the assassination, and on camera, his composure finally cracked. He had spent all those years believing, rightly or not, that a reaction a fraction of a second faster might have changed history, and the weight of that belief never lifted. Frank Horrigan, the character Eastwood plays, was shaped loosely around Hill. The film goes a step further than the real man's story by imagining Horrigan as the agent who had actually ridden in the Kennedy motorcade and failed to stop the shot, a fictional burden laid right on top of a real one. It is invented history, but it handed the thriller something most action movies of the period never reached for. A hero whose defining trait is a 30-year-old failure he has never been able to set down. Eastwood drew on that televised remorse more than on any briefing about tactics or hardware. The grief Hill showed a national audience became the emotional spine of the performance. It is the reason a glossy summer thriller carries a real undertow of sorrow every time Horrigan goes quiet. And the reason audiences believed in this agent's pain long before they cared who the villain was. The inspiration here was never really the agency. It was one man's guilt, broadcast once on a Sunday night and never forgotten. Number 3. A carousel of almost Horrigans. Half a dozen of Hollywood's biggest leading men had a claim on Frank Horrigan before Eastwood ever picked up the screenplay. Robert Redford, Dustin Hoffman, Sean Connery, James Caan, Tommy Lee Jones, Val Kilmer. Each was attached or offered the role at one point or another, and Tom Selleck had even developed a version of it as a television project years before any of them. The part passed through more famous hands than most films ever see, and it stuck to none of them. It floated like that for years. The screenplay drifted from studio to studio and star to star, and every near miss would have produced a different film. A Connery Horrigan might have leaned on weary granite authority. Redford could have played the agent as wounded idealism in a good suit, while a Caan or a Kilmer would have pushed the danger and the volatility. The role kept attracting heavyweight talent and kept slipping away from all of it, sitting in development long enough to outlast a fashion cycle or two in leading men. By the time Eastwood finally committed, he carried an advantage none of the earlier names had: age. He was old enough to make the agent's regret feel earned rather than performed, and he came to the project as a star with full creative control. That control mattered because it meant the next major decision was entirely his to make. Before a single frame was shot, the man who would play Horrigan got to choose who would stand behind the camera. Number 4. The director Clint rescued from a flop. I was a little intimidated, I'll admit that. That, more or less, is how Wolfgang Petersen described his first days working beside Eastwood, and he had every reason to feel the nerves. He was not the obvious pick to direct a Hollywood star at the very height of his prestige. He was a filmmaker whose American career had just stumbled badly. A year earlier, Petersen had made a thriller called Shattered that came and went without much notice, and his momentum in Hollywood had stalled. What turned it around was Eastwood himself. Already attached to the project before any director had been hired, Eastwood watched Shattered, saw real craft underneath a film that had not connected with audiences, and pushed for Petersen personally. The studio deferred to its star, and a director who had been drifting suddenly held one of the biggest jobs of the year. Whatever nerves he carried into that first week, Petersen earned Eastwood's trust quickly, and the partnership held all the way through a demanding shoot. The bet paid off for both men. Over the next decade, Petersen directed Outbreak, Air Force One, and The Perfect Storm, becoming one of the most dependable, big-budget filmmakers in the business. For a director who had been all but written off 12 months before, it amounted to a complete second act, and it started with a star deciding to take a chance on him. Number 5. Why Clint nearly turned it down. 62. That was Eastwood's age when the screenplay reached him, and it nearly cost the film its leading man. Frank Horrigan had been written as someone around 50, still in his physical prime, the kind of agent who could plausibly outrun a younger assassin. Eastwood's first instinct was that the part belonged to a younger actor, and that he had no business chasing it. Rather than fight the gap between the role and the man, the production leaned all the way into it. The rewrites gave Horrigan aching knees, a slower step, a self-aware streak about his own creaking body, and a quiet sense that the job had outlasted his ability to do it cleanly. The timing could not have been better. Eastwood was coming straight off Unforgiven, where he had played an aging killer, haunted and worn down by his own past, and that same autumnal mood carried perfectly into a Secret Service veteran trying to outrun his history. The very thing that had made him hesitate became the richest part of the character. He even let the script poke fun at exactly who he was. The near rejection had turned into one of the best roles of his later career, sharp precisely because it never once pretended he was young. And at one point, Horrigan sums up the whole reinvention himself, completely deadpan, describing the man behind the badge as a piano-playing heterosexual white male over the age of 50. Number 6. Rene Russo and the Age Gap Romance. On paper, the romance should have been a liability. The leading man was past 60, the leading woman more than 20 years younger, and the cautious move would have been to soften the difference or pretend it was not there at all. The picture went the other way entirely and wrote the gap straight into the dialogue, letting the two characters tease each other about it rather than tiptoe around it. Rene Russo played Agent Lily Raines as Horrigan's equal, not his reward. She trades jabs with him, calls out his flirting, pushes back on his stubbornness, and never once settles into the decorative girlfriend role the genre routinely handed actresses in 1993. The writing treats her as a sharp professional who happens to be drawn to a difficult older colleague, which is far more interesting on screen than a trophy. Russo was breaking out at exactly this moment, fresh off Lethal Weapon 3, and the part gave her real material to play instead of the usual ornament. That choice did real work for the thriller as a whole. A cat-and-mouse plot only holds together if the audience cares about the man being hunted, and the spiky grown-up relationship gave Horrigan something to lose in the present to set against the guilt he carried out of the past. Every time the stakes needed to feel personal, the film could lean on the two of them rather than on the body count. The danger landed because the relationship underneath it felt human. Number 7. The Secret Service goes to Hollywood. That same year, the agency that guards the president turned Hollywood down twice. It declined to cooperate with Dave and guarding Tess, two far friendlier portraits of life around the White House. Then it said yes to this one, a film whose hero is a man tormented by the day he failed to save a president and whose plot turns on the agency being outmaneuvered by a single, methodical killer. On its face, the choice seemed backwards. The reason came down to accuracy. The real agents wanted the public to see the work done right, and they were willing to accept an unflattering, fallible protagonist and a few pointed criticisms of the agency on screen in order to get it. This was the first time the United States Secret Service had fully cooperated with a feature film, and it sent a retired assistant director to work as the on-set technical advisor, coaching the cast on stance on how a detail scans a crowd, on the dozens of small physical habits that separate a trained agent from an actor pretending to be one. The aim was credibility, not flattery. There was a second, more practical hope underneath all the cooperation. Some officials reckoned that a sharp, popular thriller might do for their recruiting what Top Gun had done for naval aviation a few years before, drawing a new wave of applicants toward the work. So the agency got two things out of the same picture. It got its job shown honestly, and it got a recruiting reel disguised as a summer blockbuster, playing to packed houses across the country. Number 8. The world's first digital haircut. In one striking sequence, Eastwood stands in a Dallas crowd in 1963, decades younger than his real age, watching the Kennedy motorcade roll past. He was, of course, never there. The image was built out of authentic archival film and early digital compositing, and it consumed a meaningful slice of the $40 million budget, a serious sum to spend on a few seconds of finished footage in 1993. The challenge was making a man in his 60s read convincingly as a young agent in his 30s. To do it, the effects team went back to Eastwood's own movies from the early 1960s, lifted footage of his younger face and hair, and grafted that younger version of him into the historical plates of the motorcade. One of the producers later joked that Clint had received the world's first digital haircut, a throwaway line at the time that turned out to describe something the industry had simply never done before. It was a small effect that cast a long shadow. The same basic trick of dropping a present-day actor seamlessly into real historical footage would become world famous just a year later in Forrest Gump, which is almost always credited as the breakthrough that proved it could be done. This thriller got there a full year earlier, in a handful of frames most viewers watched without ever suspecting anything unusual had taken place. A milestone in early digital filmmaking slipped by unnoticed inside a Clint Eastwood chase movie. Number 9. Malkovich hated the running. Off-camera, John Malkovich was soft-spoken and bookish, the sort of actor who discussed craft in something close to a murmur and seemed incapable of menacing anyone. On camera, as the assassin Mitch Leary, that exact stillness became the most frightening thing in the entire movie. His bet was that real dread comes from control rather than volume, and he played Leary as a man who never once raises his, which is why the character unsettles people 3 decades later. The role was a real departure for him, too. After an earlier Oscar nomination for far gentler work, this was his first true turn as a leading screen villain, and he committed to it down to small, contrarian details, like insisting on keeping his natural reddish hair instead of dyeing it something darker and more conventionally sinister. The one part of the job he actively disliked turned out to be the physical side. Leary spends a good deal of the film chasing Horrigan and fleeing from him on foot, and Malkovich, by his own cheerful account, had done absolutely nothing to prepare for any of it. He was not a runner. He had no wish to become one, and he flatly refused to train. As he told it afterward, he simply set down his cigarettes and ran. Number 10. The 2000 Extra Parade Shoot. For 2 days, an entire city block was dressed up as a presidential campaign stop, hung with bunting and banners and stars and stripes, and packed with a crowd thick enough to lose a man in. The point of all that effort was a single moment of danger, the kind of public event where an assassin could stand a few feet from his target in plain sight and nobody would notice until it was too late. Around 2,000 extras filled out that crowd, and managing them was closer to staging a real political rally than shooting a movie scene. The production needed permits, barricades, and crowd control for an event that did not exist, all while keeping the choreography of the threat clear enough for an audience to follow on screen. To make the fictional rally feel authentic, second unit crews went out and captured the texture of the real 1992 campaign season, folding genuine political energy into the stage one so the backdrop never read as a set. The spending did not stop at street level. To sell the political world the rest of the film lived inside, the realism had to be total, even where the audience would barely register it. So on a soundstage over in Culver City, the crew constructed a $250,000 interior of Air Force One, detailed enough to pass for the real aircraft, also that a few minutes of the story could play out aboard the president's plane. Number 11. Ennio Morricone's Quiet Reunion. 3 decades before this film, a young Italian composer was writing the eerie whistles, twanging guitars, and gunshot percussion that turned a run of low-budget Italian westerns into something close to opera. The films were Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy. The lean figure squinting through the cigar smoke, the one the whole sound was built around, was Clint Eastwood. The composer was Ennio Morricone, and the music he wrote there made both their names. When Morricone took the assignment on this thriller, 30 years on, neither man made any fuss about the history between them. There was no press tour built around the reunion, no winking nostalgia in the marketing, no scene engineered to nod back at the westerns. He simply went to work, and what he produced sounded nothing like the desert. The score runs on a tense, modern electronic pulse through the pursuit sequences, all unease and forward motion, then opens into full orchestral warmth for the romance between Horrigan and Lily. It sits a long way from the spaghetti western twang that first tied him to Eastwood, the work of a composer with nothing left to prove choosing to score a chase as though it were also a love story. The music earned real admiration on release, and it has aged far better than most early 1990s thriller scores, which leaned hard on synthesizers that dated almost immediately. Morricone's did not, because underneath the modern texture sat the same melodic instinct that had carried Leone's films. Whether either man ever sat with the symmetry of it, the same composer tracking the same actor's pursuit across a 30-year gap, is something neither of them ever really said in public. The reunion happened, the work spoke for itself, and the full circle closed without anyone needing to point at it. Number 12. Clint plays the piano himself. The hands moving across the keys in Horrigan's quiet bar scene belong to the star himself, not a stand-in and not a session musician hired to fake it. Eastwood is genuinely playing, and some of the music heard in the film came directly from his own pen. For an actor, the public tends to file under granite-faced gunslingers and hard-nosed cops. It is the kind of detail that is easy to watch right past. Music had been part of his life far longer than fame had. He made his first record back in 1959 during his Rawhide days, a set of cowboy and western standards that played straight off his television image as a singing cowhand. The deeper habit, though, was the piano and the jazz he had loved since he was young, the thing he kept doing in private for decades whenever the cameras were off. He would later go on to compose the scores for several of his own films as a director, including the spare, mournful music of Mystic River. The instrument in that bar was something he had been good at his whole adult life, finally turning up on screen inside one of his characters. His personal taste shaped the soundtrack in a smaller way too. The Miles Davis recording playing in Frank Horrigan's apartment, The Cool and Searching All Blues, was Eastwood's own choice. A piece of his real record collection slipped into his character's home to say something about the man without a single line of dialogue. The tough guy on the screen and the lifelong jazz obsessive behind the camera, it turns out, were never two different people. Number 13. Clint really hung from that ledge. Several stories above a downtown street with nothing holding him in place but a harness hidden under his coat, Eastwood let himself dangle over the edge of a rooftop for one of the film's biggest set pieces. He was 62 years old at the time. Stunt doubles handled the genuine falls, the moments where a body actually drops out of frame and has to land safely, but the shots of the star clinging to the side of the building with the ground a very long way down are mostly the man himself. He pushed himself in other scenes too, including a brutal sequence that has him sprinting flat out alongside the president's moving limousine, lungs and legs working overtime. Throughout the shoot, he stayed committed to doing the bulk of the physical work in person, letting the doubles step in only for the most dangerous drops. The safety rigging and insurance on a sequence like that are considerable, and most stars his age would have handed the entire thing to a stuntman without a second thought. Not everyone was convinced by the result. A few critics raised an eyebrow, noting as politely as they could that a man in his early 60s sprinting after motorcades and hanging off ledges asked a fair amount of an audience's willingness to believe. Number 14. The improvised gun-in-mouth moment. Nothing in the screenplay called for what happened next. In one of the film's tensest standoffs, Leary has Horrigan beaten, disarmed, and entirely at his mercy, and the scene as written simply had the villain hold the upper hand. Instead of playing that menace straight, Malkovich improvised something on the spot, raising his own pistol and pressing the barrel into his own mouth to mock the helpless agent in front of him, all but daring him to try something. Petersen loved the moment immediately and kept the take. The story that has trailed it around for years is that Eastwood, watching from just off camera, actually laughed out loud at the sheer audacity of the choice, and you can very nearly see that reaction bleeding back into the half-smile Leary wears around the barrel. Two performers with opposite instincts had stumbled into something the script could never have engineered on purpose, a flash of real danger and real mischief landing in the same beat. It is the sort of flourish that should, by every rule, collapse straight into camp. An assassin gagging himself on his own weapon to taunt a hero reads, described flatly, like an actor reaching for far too much. Somehow, it does the exact opposite. The beat became the single image most people carry out of the entire film, the thing they quote and imitate, and it sits near the very top of any honest accounting of Malkovich's screen career. A small, unscripted gamble outlasted almost everything around it that had been carefully planned. Number 15. The polymer gun fact check. For a stretch of the 1980s, Washington worked itself into a real fear of a weapon that could supposedly stroll through a metal detector without raising a single beep. The dread of an undetectable plastic gun slipping past airport security and courthouse checkpoints ran hot enough, in the press and in Congress alike, that lawmakers eventually passed a 1988 law banning firearms that scanners and detectors could not catch. It was a real scare, driven by real headlines and real political urgency, even though the nightmare object at the center of it barely existed. The film built its villain's entire arsenal straight out of that anxiety. Leary painstakingly hand-makes a composite handgun engineered to defeat security screening, and a good chunk of the plot leans on the cleverness of it. He smuggles the few unavoidable metal pieces through a checkpoint by disguising them as everyday objects hidden inside a keychain and a pen, then assembles the rest of the weapon from materials a scanner would wave straight through. For a 1993 audience that had spent most of a decade reading about plastic guns, the whole scheme played as frighteningly, convincingly plausible. The reality was a good deal less alarming than either the movie or the headlines suggested. A fully working firearm made entirely of polymer was, and to a large extent still is, fiction. A live round needs a metal primer to ignite it, and metal parts to contain the explosion when it fires, which is the very reason those smuggled keychain and pen pieces had to exist in the plot in the first place. Strip out the metal entirely and the thing will not fire at all. What you would be holding is a paperweight. The film's weapon was clever screenwriting wrapped tightly around a real public fear, and it worked on audiences precisely because they had spent years being told the nightmare was already on its way. Number 16. The Hotel with a Hall of Fame. On the western edge of downtown Los Angeles stands a cluster of mirrored glass cylinders with elevators that climb the outside of the building in clear glass capsules, carrying passengers up the face of it in full view of the street. That is the Westin Bonaventure, and its vertiginous central atrium and exposed lifts are where the film stages its climactic shootout. Horrigan and Leary circling each other through the open core of the building as the lobby drops away dozens of floors below. Filmmakers have never quite been able to leave the place alone. That same dizzying geometry has turned up in True Lies, Heat, and Interstellar, among many other productions, because the building reads as instantly cinematic the moment a camera tilts up through its hollow center. A few blocks away, the older and far statelier Biltmore stood in for the Denver Hotel, where Horrigan and Lily share their calmer, more intimate scenes, which gave the production two completely different architectural moods to play one chase against the other. The connection to this film stuck harder than most. The Bonaventure went so far as to mount a plaque marking its role in the shootout, a small piece of civic pride that turned a movie location into a permanent part of the building's own story. Decades and dozens of shoots later, it remains the cylinder of glass that filmmakers reach for whenever they need downtown Los Angeles to look sleek, disorienting, and a little like the future. And a Clint Eastwood thriller is a large part of the reason why. Number 17. Phoning it in side by side. The natural assumption is that the two stars never actually shared a room while shooting their phone calls. Those wiretap conversations between Horrigan and Leary, all bated menace and probing little questions, feel exactly like the kind of thing actors record alone, in separate sessions weeks apart, reading their half of the exchange off a script supervisor's flat delivery. According to Petersen, that is not how any of it was done. The director kept both men on set together for those scenes, actually on the line with each other in real time, so each one could react to what the other was actually doing in the moment. That single decision is a large part of why the calls crackle the way they do. The pauses are real pauses. The needling lands because there is a real person on the other end being needled, and the tension belongs to two performers occupying the same space, rather than to an editor stitching separate recordings into something that only sounds spontaneous. What made it sing was that their working methods could hardly have been more different. Eastwood liked to stay loose and print early takes, trusting his first instinct over endless repetition, getting in and getting out. Malkovich built his readings with deliberate, almost surgical care, weighing the exact stress of every syllable until it landed precisely where he wanted it. Put the two of them on the same wire and the relaxed menace and the exacting control struck sparks off each other. The best scenes in the whole film came directly out of that friction. Number 18. The Editor Who Cut Lawrence of Arabia. 3 decades before this thriller, a young British filmmaker handed Lawrence of Arabia one of the most studied moments in all of cinema. The famous leap from a blown-out match to a vast, blazing desert sunrise. A transition so audacious and so clean that students still learn it, shot by name. Her work on that epic won her an Academy Award and a permanent place in the history of the form. Her name was Anne V. Coates, and by the time she joined this production, she was in her late 60s, with a body of work most of Hollywood would have envied. The job of shaping the thriller's relentless, almost clockwork pace earned her a 4th Academy Award nomination decades after that first win. The reason the cat and mouse never sags, the way a 2-hour chase keeps tightening its grip instead of slackening as it goes, owes an enormous amount to the rhythm she found buried in the raw footage and the instinct that told her exactly where to cut away. She would keep working into her 90s and eventually receive an honorary Oscar for the whole of it, a fitting acknowledgement that one of the great editors of the 20th century had spent a chunk of 1993 making sure a Clint Eastwood thriller never once let its audience catch its breath. The desert match cut, and this taut political chase came from the same pair of hands half a lifetime apart. Number 19. The President's Buried Endorsement. A sitting commander-in-chief once went on national television and praised this film, and the studio's first instinct was to make sure as few people as possible ever found out about it. It is one of the strangest marketing decisions in the entire history of the picture, a free gift from the very top of American power that its owners chose to lock in a drawer. The man doing the praising was President Bill Clinton, who talked the movie up during an appearance on Larry King Live. An unsolicited endorsement from the most powerful person on the planet is normally the kind of thing a studio frames and builds a whole campaign around. This one got shelved instead. Nervous executives honestly could not decide whether a presidential plug would draw curious audiences in or drag the film straight into the partisan crossfire of an unusually charged political season. And rather than gamble, they chose silence. So it simply sat there, unused. The rare case of a movie actively hiding praise rather than shouting it from every poster. Whether putting that endorsement to work would have sold a single extra ticket, or whether it might have cost the film a chunk of its audience on the other side of the aisle, is something no marketing team ever got the chance to find out. The most powerful man in the country recommended the picture, and the people who made it decided the safest thing to do with that was nothing at all. Number 20. One of the first trailers posted online. When the marketing team uploaded a short preview of the movie to America Online, they were attempting something almost no major studio had bothered to try yet. This was 1993, years before streaming video was a phrase anyone used, a time when pulling a clip down a phone line meant sitting through the long electronic shriek of a dial-up modem and praying the connection did not drop halfway through. Putting a film preview online at all was less a strategy than a curiosity, an experiment by a campaign willing to poke at a brand new medium just to see what would happen. What happened, by any modern standard, was almost nothing. In its first week available, the preview was downloaded by roughly 170 people in total. It counts by most reckonings as one of the very first major studio films to put a preview on the internet at all, which only makes that tiny turnout more of a period curiosity. A tactic that now routinely reaches hundreds of millions of viewers within hours of a launch began. For this film, with an audience small enough to fit comfortably inside a single lecture hall, watching grainy footage crawl onto their screens one slow line at a time. Number 21. The Summer of '93 Box Office Brawl. It opened in third place, boxed in behind a glossy legal thriller and a theme park overrun with dinosaurs, then proceeded to do something films that open in third rarely manage. Instead of fading out over the following weekends the way most also-rans do, it climbed. The release landed in July 1993, right in the teeth of one of the most crowded summers of the decade. The firm and the era-defining juggernaut Jurassic Park were both ahead of it out of the gate. And the usual fate of a film opening behind two phenomena like that is a quick decline into the second tier. This one refused to follow that script. It moved up into second place and held there for weeks on end, propelled by strong word of mouth, an A cinema score from opening night audiences, and a critical consensus that still sits up around 96% positive all these years later. The arithmetic told the rest of the story. Built on a $40 million budget, the thriller pulled in well north of $100 million at home and somewhere around $187 million worldwide, a handsome profit by any measure. It turned out to be that rare release that satisfied the critics and the accountants in equal measure, a prestige grown-up chase picture that also, week after week, kept right on printing money. Number 22. 3 Oscar nods and a famous snub. The most unsettling performance in the entire movie walked away from the Academy Awards with nothing, and so did everyone else the film sent to the ceremony. The picture had earned a respectable trio of nominations that spring, real recognition from the industry, and then it lost every single one of them in a season absolutely stacked with heavyweight competition. Malkovich was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for his work as Mitch Leary. Jeff Maguire, the same writer who had been packing boxes to leave town a couple of years before, was up for Best Original Screenplay, which closed a remarkable loop on one of the great spec script comeback stories in modern Hollywood. Ann Coates was recognized for film editing. Then, one by one, the envelopes opened and went the other way. Tommy Lee Jones took Supporting Actor for The Fugitive. Jane Campion won Original Screenplay for The Piano. Michael Kahn claimed film editing for Schindler's List. 3 nominations, 3 losses, every one of them to formidable and now canonical work. Of the 3, it is the Malkovich loss that audiences still argue about decades later. His Leary had already become the kind of supporting turn that overshadows half the films it appears in, a performance other actors would go on to study, and a great many viewers felt at the time, and still feel, that the Academy simply got it wrong. The film was far from ignored elsewhere, picking up recognition from the BAFTAs, the Golden Globes, and the Edgar Awards for crime writing. But whether Leary truly deserved the statuette over Jones is the kind of bar argument that has no real resolution, and that missing answer may itself be the highest compliment a screen villain can ever earn. Number 23. The Villain Who Joined the Legends. 3 decades on, Mitch Leary still turns up almost every time people start arguing about the most frightening characters the movies have ever produced. He never raises his voice. He explains himself, calmly and reasonably, as though murder were simply a problem he had finished thinking through. The threat in his voice is the patience of a man who has already worked out every angle, which lands as far more chilling than any amount of shouting. and it put him squarely in the conversation for the kind of heroes and villains canon the American Film Institute likes to compile. His fingerprints are all over the screen assassins and masterminds who came after him, the soft-spoken, hyper-articulate killer who treats violence as a matter of cold logic rather than rage. Earlier movie hitmen had mostly sneered or seethed their way through their scenes, broadcasting their menace at full volume. After Leary, a colder and more cerebral style became its own recognizable type, copied and adapted across decades of thrillers that wanted their villains to feel intelligent rather than merely dangerous. The film's influence reached well past that one character too. Its success helped clear a path for the run of smart, grown-up political thrillers that filled the middle of the 1990s, the kind of films that trusted their audiences to follow procedure, motive, and argument, instead of leaning on explosions to do the work. Leary, in the end, outlived his own movie. He became a permanent reference point, the standard a certain breed of intelligent screen menace still gets measured against whenever a new one arrives. Number 24. Clint's 19-year directing streak begins. After the camera stopped rolling on this film, Eastwood settled into a pattern he would hold to for nearly 20 years, even if he almost certainly never thought of it as a decision at the time. From this point onward, whenever he stepped in front of a camera in a feature film, he was, with very few exceptions, standing behind it as the director as well. He would not appear in a movie directed by anyone else until 2012, when he took the lead in Trouble with the Curve under another filmmaker's hand. That adds up to a 19-year stretch during which he directed nearly everything he acted in, an unusual run even measured against Hollywood's other actor-directors. Some of that instinct may well have hardened on this very production. Watching Petersen run a lean, tightly controlled, suspenseful set, getting big results without a wasted motion, lined up neatly with the stripped-down, no-fuss way Eastwood already preferred to work, and it seemed to confirm something for him about how he wanted to make his films. So, this thriller sits at a hinge point in his long career, the last time for almost 2 decades that Eastwood the actor would hand the reins over to anyone but Eastwood the director. The next time he turned up on a screen taking direction from someone else, the calendar had rolled all the way to 2012, and the filmmaker giving the orders was directing a star who had spent 19 straight years being entirely his own boss. More than 30 years later, In the Line of Fire still holds up as one of the smartest cat-and-mouse thrillers of its decade, a 96% fresh film that put a reinvented Eastwood opposite a villain a lot of people still believe was robbed at the Oscars. It pulled a flatlining director back into the A-list and helped open the door for the wave of grown-up political thrillers that followed. If you turned up something here you had never heard before, the like and the subscribe button both help more deep dives like this one find people, so give them a tap on your way out. And I am honestly curious which secret got you: the digital haircut, the improvised gun in the mouth, or a sitting president's endorsement vanishing into a studio drawer. Tell me in the comments and I will see you in the next one.